Chapter 11 of Gulliver of Mars by Edwin L. Arnold. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James Christopher. Gulliver of Mars by Edwin L. Arnold. Chapter 11. With the new morning came fresh energy, and a spasm of conscience as I thought of poor Heru, and the shabby sort of rescuer I was to lie about with these pretty triflers while she remained in peril. So I had a bath and a swim, a breakfast, and, to my shame be it acknowledged, a sort of farewell merry-go-round dance on the yellow sands, with a dozen young persons, all light-hearted as the morning, beautiful as the flowers that bound their hair, and in the extremity of statuesque attire. Then at last I got them to give me a sea-going canoe, a stock of cakes, and fresh water. And with many parting injunctions on how to find the woodman trail, since I would not listen to reason and lie all the rest of my life with them in the sunshine, they pushed me off on my lonely voyage. "Over the blue waters," they shouted in chorus, as I dipped my paddle into the diamond-crested wavelets. 6 hours, adventurous stranger, with the sun behind you. Then into the broad river behind the yellow sandbar. But not the black northward river, not the strong black river, above all things, stranger. For that is the river of the dead, by which many go, but none come back. Goodbye." And waving them adieu, I sternly turned my eyes from delights behind, and faced the fascination of perils in front. In 4 hours, for the Martians had forgotten in their calculations that my muscles were so much stronger than theirs, I rose the further shore, and then the question was, where ran that westward river of theirs? It turned out afterwards that, knowing nothing of their tides, I had drifted much too far northward, and consequently the coast had closed up the estuary mouth I should have entered. Not a sign of an opening showed anywhere, and having nothing whatever for guidance, I turned northward, eagerly scanning the endless lines of low cliffs, as the day lessened, for the promised sandbar or inlet. About dusk my canoe, flying swiftly forward at its own sweet will, brought me into a bight, a bare, desolate-looking country with no vegetation save grass and sedge on the near marshes and stony hills rising up beyond, with others beyond them mounting step by step into a long line of ridges and peaks still covered in winter snow. The outlook was anything but cheering. Not a trace of habitation had been seen for a long time, not a single living being in whose neighbourhood I could land and ask the way, nothing living anywhere but a monstrous kind of sea slug, as big as a dog, battening on the waterside garbage, and gaunt birds like vultures, who croaked on the mud flats, and half spread wings of funeral blackness as they gambolled here and there. Where was poor Heru? Where pink-shouldered An? Where those wild men who had taken the princess from us? Lastly, but not least, where was I? All the first stars of the Martian sky were strange to me, and my boat whirling round and round on the current confused what little geography I might otherwise have retained. It was a cheerless lookout, and again I cursed my folly for coming on such a fool's errand as I sat, chin in hand, staring at the landscape that grew more and more depressing every mile. To go on looked like destruction, to go back almost impossible without a guide, and while I was still wondering which of the two might be the lesser evil, the stream I was on turned a corner, and in a moment we were upon water which ran with swift, oily smoothness straight for the snow ranges now beginning to loom unpleasantly close ahead. By this time the night was coming on apace, the last of the evil-looking birds had winged its way across the red sunset glare, and though it was clear enough in mid-river under the banks, now steep and unclimbable, it was already evening. And with the darkness came a wondrous cold breath from off the ice fields, blowing through my lowland wrappings as though they were but tissue. I munched a bit of honey cake, took a cautious sip of wine, and though I will not own I was frightened, yet no one will deny that the circumstances were discouraging. Standing up in the frail canoe and looking around, at the second glance an object caught my eye, coming up with the stream, and rapidly overtaking me on a strong sluice of water. It was a raft of some sort, and something extraordinarily like a sitting Martian on it. Nearer and nearer it came, bobbing to the rise and fall of each wavelet with the last icy sunlight touching it up with reds and golds. Nearer and nearer in the deadly hush of that forsaken region, and then at last so near that it showed quite plainly on the purple water, a raft with someone sitting under a canopy. With a thrill of delight I waved my cap aloft and shouted, "Ship ahoy! Hullo, messmate! Where are we bound to?" But never an answer came from that swiftly passing stranger, so again I hailed, "Put up your helm, Mr. Skipper, I have lost my bearings, and the chronometer is run down." But without a pause or sound that strange craft went slipping by. That silence was more than I could stand. It was against all sea courtesies, and the last chance of learning where I was passing away. So angrily the paddle was snatched from the canoe bottom, and roaring out again, "Stop, I say, you damned lubber! Stop, or by all the gods I will make you!" I plunged the paddle into the water, and shot my little craft slantingly across the stream to intercept the newcomer. A single stroke sent me into midstream. A second brought me within a touch of that strange craft. It was a flat raft undoubtedly, though so disguised by flowers and silk trailers that its shape was difficult to make out. In the centre was a chair of ceremony bedecked with greenery and great pale buds, hardly yet withered. Oh, where had I seen such a chair in such a raft before? And the riddle did not remain long unanswered. Upon that seat, as I swept up alongside and laid the sunburnt hand upon its edge, was a girl, and another look told me she was dead. Such a sweet, pallid Martian maid, her fair head lolling back against the rear of the chair, and gently moving to and fro with the rise and fall of her craft. Her face in the pale light of the evening like carved ivory, and not less passionless and still. Her arms bare, and her poor fingers still closed in her lap upon the beautiful buds that they had put into them. I fairly gasped with amazement at the dreadful sweetness of that solitary lady, and could hardly believe she was really a corpse. But alas, there was no doubt of it, and I stared at her, half in admiration and half in fear, noting how the last sunset flush lent a hectic beauty to her face for a moment, and then how fair and ghostly she stood out against the purpling sky, how her light drapery lifted to the icy wind, and how dreadfully strange all those soft-scented flowers and trappings seemed as we sped along side by side into the country of night and snow. Then all of a sudden the true meaning of her being there burst upon me, and with a start and a cry I looked around. We were flying swiftly down that river of the dead they had told me of, that has no outlet and no returning. With frantic haste I snatched up a paddle again and tried to paddle against the great black current sweeping us forward. I worked until the perspiration stood in beads on my forehead, and all the time I worked the river, like some black snake, hissed and twined, and that pretty lady rode cheerily along at my side. Overhead stars of unearthly brilliancy were coming out in the frosty sky, while on either hand the banks were high and the shadows under them black as ink. In those shadows now and then I noticed with a horrible indifference other rafts were travelling, and presently, as the stream narrowed, they came out and joined us, dead Martians, budding boys and girls, older voyagers with their age quickening upon them in the Martian manner, just as some fruit only ripens after it falls, yellow-girt slaves staring into the night in front. Quite a merry crew all clustered about I and that gentle lady, and more far ahead and more behind, all bobbing and jostling forward as we hurried to the dreadful graveyard in the Martian regions of eternal winter none had ever seen and no one came to. I cried aloud in my desolation and fear, and hid my face in my hands, while the icy cliffs mocked my cry, and the dead maid, tripping alongside, rolled her head over, and stared at me with stony, unseeing eyes. Well, I am no fine writer. I sat down to tell a plain, unvarnished tale, and I will not let the weird horror of that ride get into my pen. We careened forward, I and those lost Martians, until pretty near on midnight, by which time the great light-giving plants were up, and never a chance did fate give me all that time of parting company with them. About midnight we were right into the region of snow and ice, not the actual polar region of the planet as I afterwards guessed, but one of those long outliers which follows the course of the broad waterways almost into the fertile regions, and the cold, though intense, was somewhat modified by the complete stillness of the air. It was just then I began to be aware of a low rumbling sound ahead, increasing steadily until there could be no doubt the journey was nearly over, and we were approaching those great falls An had told me of, over which the dead tumbled to perpetual oblivion. There was no opportunity for action, and luckily little time for thought. I remember clapping my hand to my heart as I muttered an imperfect prayer, and laughing a little as I felt in my pocket, between it and that organ, an envelope containing some corn plaster and a packet of unpaid tailor's bills. Then I pulled out that locket with poor forgotten Polly's photograph, and while I was still kissing it fervently, and the dead girl on my right was jealously nudging my canoe with the corner of her raft, we plunged into a narrow gully as black as hell, shot round a sharp corner at a tremendous pace, and the moment afterwards entered a lake in the midst of an unbroken amphitheatre of cliffs gleaming in soft light all around. Even to this moment I can recall the blue shine of those terrible ice crags framing the weird picture in on every hand, and the strange effect upon my mind as we passed out of the darkness of the gully down which we had come into the sepulchral radiance of that place. But though it fixed with one instantaneous flash its impressions on my mind forever, there was no time to admire it.